anyone who's ever worked at the sharp end of digital product development understands that there are basically two tribes involved. There's the designer tribe, and then there's the developer and engineer tribe. And what you try to do is get those two groups of people to come together to create something special. And when that works, it's great. You get great digital products on time, on budget, that work out of the gate, that satisfy users and indeed the boss. And then everyone continues to get paid, which is a good result. The problem is that doesn't really ever happen that easily. When a designer thinks they understand how something should look and feel and behave, it's not necessarily the same as what the developer can actually achieve. And the developer will sit there confused as to why the designer thinks that that is even possible. And anyway, we've all got lots of questions and it takes loads of time. There's lots of iteration. It extends the process, adds cost. How might we make that smoother? One company has an idea, and that company is Figma. Now, Figma has become a favorite tool of designers all over the world for quite a long time. It's been hoovering up market share in that context since it was first unveiled around 10 years ago now. Figma is a web-based online collaborative design playground, for want of a better phrase. It is very powerful, it's very intuitive, it's very accessible, and it's very good at delivering the materials and the results that you need out of the back end of it, partly because there's a whopping marketplace of plugins that you can use to make sure that it does what you need it to do. I'm not saying all of this stuff because I'm being paid to. I'm saying it because I use Figma myself every single day, and it's brilliant. But the people behind Figma a few months ago realized that a seriously large number of people on their platform at any one time weren't actually designers. They were developers. And that maybe there was something here that they could do. Maybe developers could be included in this great big online collaborative love-in, and that would help them too. So they got to work and they developed something called Dev Mode. Dev Mode was released in beta last year, and it's about to come out of beta now, finally, at the time of recording this. But is it any good? Does it work? Does it bridge the gap between design and engineering? I figured the only way to find out would be to invite a couple of people from Figma itself onto the podcast. One of them's a designer and one of them's an engineer. They both worked on Dev Mode. Here's what they had to say. Oscar and Tom, welcome to the podcast. I think before we can talk about Figma and we can talk about the ceaseless violent conflict that occurs every day between designers and engineers, we should meet a designer and an engineer at Figma. So that's who you guys are. Oscar, give us an overview. What is it that you do at Figma then?
That's right. Yeah. Hi, I'm Oscar, product designer at Figma. Been a product designer for almost a decade now, previously I worked at pretty fun. I've been working with the game Minecraft out of the Swedish game studio.
Never heard of it.
I'm based in Sweden. Comparing Minecraft and Figma, there's some, creativity, collaboration, things you can compare there. That's pretty fun. But yeah, I've been doing product design, and now I'm working on Dev Mode. So designing the Dev Mode product in Figma, and that's what I've been doing for the last 2 years or so. Right.
So Dev Mode is obviously, I think, what we're going to talk about, and what that represents in an interesting way in terms of tackling that. I may have exaggerated the violent conflict that happens between designers and developers, but there is that tension there always, because that's what Figma and Dev Mode is looking to address. But Tom, you are the flip side of Oscar's coin, as
I am.
Well, in my head, that's what you are. You are an engineer at Figma. What does that involve for you?
Yeah, that's right. So I'm an engineer on the developer tools team in London. So we're a team who build the Dev Mode part of Figma. And that can be anything from building like parts of the user interface, which developers interact with, to building like functionality under the hood or command line tools that developers interact with. But a large part of our team's job would be taking designs that people like Oscar have created and then implementing those in code and using Figma Dev Mode to help us do that. and then building Figma Dev Mode in it, which is confusing.
I was going to say, there's so many circles that we're kind of flying
It's
around.
very confusing when you have a Figma UI in a Figma design and you're sort of like, yeah, which is a real Figma?
It's like you could get lost in it forever without knowing how to get out again. And
it feels like that.
yeah, I bet. Out of interest, before we get into the whole conversation about Dev Mode and what it is and so on, because it's still very new, how did you work together at Figma before Dev Mode? Because I'm guessing you used Figma. So how did that work? How did you have a design system of some kind that you guys kind of collaborated with, or?
Yeah, I mean, at Figma, we do like, we've definitely been, I mean, in any kind of product design that's been using design tools, you're sort of handing off work to engineering. And I think that's sort of been true before Figma. It's true at Figma, and it's even more true now with Dev Mode. We are actually a little bit unique that Figma hasn't had a super strong design system internally.
Oh, right. Right, I'm just going to note this down. This is my headline.
Yeah. So, I mean, I wish I could say that, but we're a startup. We've been moving really fast, and design system hasn't been a super big focus for us. But the handoff process has been, I think, pretty unique at Figma, because we've been really embracing that multiplayer, and everyone from the team is all sort of together in the same file. That's been sort of something that's been true from the start, and that sort of bringing the whole team together and not sort of just having sort of these silos and buckets where you sort of pass work around, like that sort of collaboration sense has always been there from the start, I think, and that's what really sort of I feel like I've learned a lot, like working at Figma, because of that sort of cultural thing that we've been having from the start, I would say.
Yeah, it's more of a collaborative process than a sort of strict handoff. Here, you go and build this.
But that's right. That goes right to the heart of what Figma is in terms of how the concept that originally started Figma. And it occurs to me now that we're already talking. We haven't actually defined, for anyone who doesn't know, what Figma actually is. And I don't know who I should victimize to try and. I'm going to go for Tom. Tom.
Oh, okay.
Elevator pitch. You've got 20 seconds.
Figma is a product design tool, and if you were to put it in simple terms, it's where people are designing. Maybe what the product looks like is how you think of it, but also how it works. So there are features in there for not just designing a visual look, but also creating prototypes where you can sort of interact with it, get a feel for how it will work. And in 2021, Figma also launched a product called FigJam, which is a collaborative whiteboard environment for the whole kind of product development team to be involved in things like ideation and facilitating meetings, that kind of thing. So we kind of started off very focused on product development, and I guess you could say maybe the like visual design aspect of that to some degree. But our mission is to kind of address the needs of the whole product development kind of community within the company.
Yeah, got it. And I can attest to all of that as a daily user of Figma within my organization, and it has been kind of transformative for us. So I should put it on the record that no one's paying me to say any of this. I'm just saying it because I'm a bit of a Figma fanboy. It's a brilliant tool in that you can use it very, very easily to make competent design actually happen. But what makes it really, really amazing is that people like me can be involved in that process, i.e. people who are perhaps directing something without actually having any skills or qualifications themselves.
And I think
it's because it's that easy to use. And then in a sense, every project becomes a little community that ultimately involves now developers themselves, right?
Exactly, yeah. And the two probably the most important parts of the elevator pitch I forgot to mention. So one is that Figma is web-based, so you can just open up a Figma file in your web browser. You don't have to install any special software. The second part is that it's multiplayer, which means you can see all the changes happening to the document in real time. You can also see all the other people in the file in real time, and you can communicate via comments or via cursor chat, and you can So even if you're in different locations, which is more and more common these days with the rise of remote work, you can still collaborate in the same virtual space. And I think that's probably what really kind of distinguished Figma from competitors, and particularly, the rise of remote work in the last few years. I think it's really been like its key strength is that everyone can jump in there and see what's happening in real time. There's no more like, oh, could you send me a final version of a file, or oh, I need a license for X piece of software. And yeah, like you say, it's designed to be accessible. So people who are not involved in the design or development can still come in and look at the designs, leave feedback, and get an idea of how the product's going to work.
Yeah, absolutely. And I know, just as an example, there are people like me in the world who spend a lot of time building what we call decks. And the decks get sent to other people who just love receiving decks. And when they receive the deck, they're immediately convinced by whatever is in the deck. And then they ideally give you money and things like that. But building a deck as a group of people is a whole new experience because of Figma, where you could be saying, look, we need to put some information in a format that we can send to people in an email. You can do that in 10 minutes in Figma with 3 people busying themselves around different parts of the deck, and you're literally watching each other do that. You might be on a Teams call or something at the same time and just having a conversation while you do it. It's brilliant. A job that might have taken several rounds and maybe a couple of days now takes half an hour. And that's the difference I think it makes from a productivity point of view. And that's just from my own limited experience. But I actually, as a designer, Oscar, presumably you now spend all of your time in Figma doing design, right?
Absolutely, yeah.
Does that mean you've become desensitized and de-educated in terms of all those other familiar tools that we know about?
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely been like, as a product designer in the industry, like I feel like the whole shift to Figma has been pretty transformatory. Thinking to like the days before Figma, like the tools were, you were designing in a file on your computer, like whether it was in Photoshop or in Sketch or other tools that you were just sort of kind of off on your own, like designing in a design app, and sort of at some other point you sort of engaged the team in a meeting or in a deck or something like that, right?
Yeah.
But Figma, really, really changed that, right? Because it brought together the whole team, and it's really sort of, yeah, it's really put sort of design at the center of things, really, I would say. When you're sort of operating in teams and in organizations, like it's really makes more people think about design, and it's really engaging the whole spectrum of roles. And I think Figma extending sort of the product to things like FigJam and now Dev Mode, like kind of reflects that it's sort of an interesting sort of artifact to collect around, the group around, when you're sort of talking about what you're going to build in the digital product space.
And I think especially now, like design is really at the core of building a product, because like I say, it's how things look, it's how they work. And it's not just something where it's like, oh, it's a nice detail to have. It really is the core of making good products. And, I'm sure you've noticed yourself, when you use a well-designed product, it feels enjoyable to use. You don't even notice that it's well-designed, but it's such an important part of products today.
Yeah. And it is completely intuitive. And I think just to broaden this conversation out a bit, I guess, we a few months ago we spent some time and I say we, I mean people like me, not people like you, in Sweden in lockdown days with IKEA, talking to them specifically about design and what they call design ops. Obviously, IKEA they design quite a lot of stuff. And a lot of that is not just physical stuff, but they're designing digital experiences and so on. I can show a bit of footage of that while I'm talking here. But these are the kinds of people that will find things like Figma, and I'm sure they do, really helpful when it comes to saying, look, we've got a very large organization with lots and lots of very specific requirements in terms of what we do and don't do when we're designing things. But they also recognize that everything they design reflects the values and the character and the culture of their organization and so on. And almost all of those things are defined by people who aren't the designers, right? They're the other people who are in the organization. They're the people running the retail stores there. It's the whole thing. Figma democratizes access to design in that sense. You can involve all sorts of people, right? So as you were saying, it is kind of hard to imagine what life might have been like before Figma now, actually, once you start using it. But cast your minds back to when you may have been sharing a room in this hypothetical world, Oscar the designer and Tom the engineer, maybe even sharing the same pod in an office. What are the things that would normally get you to end up having a fight? Because I bet there were, I bet. Do you know what I mean? What are the frustrations?
Yes.
There's so much to talk about here.
I mean, I think, the classic one to me is probably, from a developer's point of view, it's seeing things in designs and you just say, that's not possible, we can't do that. And that can sometimes, or historically, that would come often quite late, be like, the designs are signed off, and then development would be like, that's not possible, or that's going to take 6 months to build that. And then I think the sort of flip side to that is that what is built by the developers doesn't end up matching the designs. It might look in the same ballpark to a developer's eye, but as soon as a designer looks at it, they're like, that spacing's wrong, that font's the wrong size. To me, those are the two that jumped out. Right.
And then I think a developer friend of mine who I was talking to before this about asking this very same question, what he was describing to me then was that there is, and this is still the way it works for him, very, very significant organization. The developer will have questions immediately, perhaps go off and say, look, I'm going to be proactive and do my best anyway. And then it goes back up the chain. And then you have this difficult process of trying to reconcile what can and can't be done and what the problems are, what questions need asking and how they get answered. And it's a debate that happens. And I wonder how much time you end up spending in that debate phase. And what he was telling me is that the way their system works currently is that he, as a developer, really relies almost entirely on annotations, so notes. So here's a design, but also here's a great big collection of notes that will tell you exactly what this is for and why it's that way and why it needs to look like that, etc. One line missing from those notes, one empty space where it would otherwise be an answer to a question, and suddenly everything falls apart, and you end up spending hours just trying to negotiate the right answers. It seems to me that what Dev Mode aims to do is to plug those gaps by saying, actually, do you know what? If you guys just work together on this at the same time, you can witness things and you can ask questions and get answers in real time. Is that a reasonable summation from an outsider's perspective of what Dev Mode is?
Yeah, I would definitely say so. Like, just thinking about the core problems of, communication and getting the details right. And another thing that comes to mind, hearing what Tom talked about, was, the design changes or it can change at many points in the process. Making sure that sort of the team understands what are the latest requirements, what are we actually intending to build. Like, that's something that is also a part of Dev Mode. But supporting that collaboration and making sure that it's not sort of a siloed process where you sort of design does like 100% of the design work and then hands it off to the engineering and they do sort of 100% of the engineering work afterwards. I think Dev Mode really helps to sort of bring it earlier into the process where both design and engineering are talking to each other, and you're really building on each other's sort of knowledge about sort of the different areas of expertise that you have. And I think that ultimately leads to just better digital products in the end, because you find out the problem areas earlier. You can really, as a designer, I can really bring in the developer and understand what sort of are the important details of the design as early as possible, so they aren't sort of catched at the last minute, things like that. So I think it also encourages a kind of cross-pollination of ideas, because it's not, developers might have good ideas about how the system should be designed. Especially like us working on Dev Mode, we, the developers who build it, are also kind of a target market, and so it really is like a two-way process. It's not like designers say it's designed like this and then we build it. There's a lot of
communication that happens right from the start about what's the right way to build this.
Right. That must have been an interesting process for you, Tom, actually, to be sitting there every day trying to solve your own problems.
Yeah,
that's a rewarding job, isn't it?
It really is. I mean, my sort of background is in web and app development. I've been doing it for 15 years, and I'm intimately familiar with all the problems that we've just talked about. Miscommunication and like building the wrong version of things, building it wrong. And so when I spoke to Figma and kind of had the opportunity to come and try and fix some of those problems, yeah, to me it was irresistible, because it's almost in the most frustrating aspect of product development to me has often been this kind of handoff, and that was somewhat limited by the tools you had and also the communication processes. And I think, yeah, it's really exciting to try and solve that. And it's not just a case of like, oh, let's give you better generated code. There's more fundamental sort of communication issues that we're trying to address there.
Yeah, and I guess that the same applies for people working on design in any capacity as well, Oscar, right? Which is that frustration point goes both ways. It's a two-way mirror, if you like. It's
totally. No, I'm totally solving my own problems with working on dev mode as well, because I have this sort of daily communication with the engineering team, and it's just as much of a problem for the designers, I think, to solve. So yeah.
Right, and this is a really softball question, given that you're not going to say anything bad, but are you both satisfied that you have gone some way to actually succeeding here and creating a new paradigm, if you like, for developers and designers to work together?
Oh, for sure. I mean, I just think the fundamentals are in a perfect place when it comes to where dev mode sits in the Figma sort of ecosystem. I think we really nailed the model of like bringing the developer in. It's the same design document. Like, it's not sort of putting the design in a new place. Like, you can still be the full team together. So I think that's a great sort of starting point. But we still have so much to do when it comes to features that sort of really empower and do really powerful things for developers and for designers. When you sort of so I think we're just getting started, and we have some really great features already. But it's a really right space to keep building powerful tools for the teams here, I think.
Yeah, I totally agree with Oscar. I feel like we've kind of done a very good job of tackling the low-hanging fruit. Like, now the software it's more intuitive for developers to use. But it's easier for them to like select the thing they're interested in. It's easier for them to translate that into code. And we're sort of starting on the process of avoiding these miscommunications. But I think now that we've got those fundamentals in place, there's a lot we can do to really kind of help revolutionize this process.
Right, absolutely. You talked about there still being a lot to do. You're not allowed, presumably, to tell us what you're working on. I'm going to ask the question just in case.
No, I mean, we can't say anything too specific. I think some of the things some of the areas that we're very focused on are things like making it so that Figma and Dev Mode works really well for companies with design systems. Making it as easy as possible, both to use that design system as a designer, but for developers to consume that design system. And we're working on stuff in that space, which we'll, in due course be talking more about, which we're very excited about, because I think that for a lot of companies we've heard that's a problem. They might have a design system, and the designers might use it, but getting the developers to use it is often a challenge. So we're really excited to try and solve that problem.
Right. And I think that's probably where my friend is at when and yeah. This is not a small company he's working for; it's a very big, well-known company. Where, I mean, actually, let me put this to you: what would you say to someone like that, who's if I try and sell Figma to them and say, look, they've got this dev mode now, it's really good, and you should go and try it and get everyone using it, and his response to that is, actually, we've got this really complicated, big design system. It's got hundreds of people working on it. There's no way we could ever even conceive of introducing some new variable into that in the form of a new tool. What would you say to that person? Let's imagine you were down the pub with us. How would you persuade him to get it? I mean, I know that it's easy to use, but how do you get him as a larger organization to consider it?
I mean, first I would say that we've been pretty careful to not introduce new sort of fundamentals that sort of that you need to do more work, essentially. It's sort of a plug and play. You can start using it, and for example, your design system is just going to be displayed better in dev mode than it was previously, or in sort of the regular Figma editor. So a lot of things just out of the box just works better, and you don't need to do a lot of work. But dev mode is also really flexible. So if we're talking to a big sort of tech enterprise like this, like there are massive opportunities to sort of shape your own perfect workflow that integrates with your probably pretty ambitious sort of software development platform. But so it really depends on the company. Like for these bigger companies, like we really have sort of the flexible tools, the plugins, the extension to sort of plug into your workflow. But it's sort of there's also all of these sort of fundamentals that speed up sort of each individual developer, the inspection tools, the comparing changes and things like that. So
yeah, I think
the collaboration tools. Yeah, Tom, go ahead.
I was going to say, I think plugins is a really big one to highlight there for kind of larger companies. A lot of larger companies who work with Figma will have their own bespoke plugins that they've created. So we have an API with which you can create plugins, which can then run in dev mode. They just appear in the sidebar, or they basically be they're embedded as a kind of natural part of the user interface. So in the case of your own design system, you could create a plugin which outputs, for example, the right code for that design system, using whatever code you'd use internally. So it's very extensible.
Yeah. So dev mode, am I correct in saying dev mode itself has just come out of beta? Is that right? As in very recently?
We're just about to come out of beta. We're still in the beta phase technically, so you can still use it for free and test it out. But yeah, we're soon at the end of January. We're coming out of beta. So yeah.
End of January. So just for the record, we are having our conversation now at the beginning of January. So 2024. You never know. Someone might be watching this in a couple of years' time. You never know. And once it's out of beta, then what?
Yeah, I mean, then it's going to be one of the sort of the products in the Figma lineup. There's going to be dev mode is included in sort of the designer seat. So if you're paying for Figma today, you have dev mode already. But you can also get cheaper seat options to get your developer if you're on the organization or enterprise tier. So, but yeah, it's going to be one of the sort of the pillars of Figma that we keep investing in to keep sort of the engineers and the developer organization really sort of empowered by working with Figma. So yeah,
great. So we can look forward to the end of violent fistfights between developers and designers.
Yeah.
They'll become less frequent, at least. Yeah.
Well, certainly at Figma, anyway.
Yeah.
And it'll be nice to think that startup heat kind of calms down a little bit, and you all start getting on. By the way, I'm sure you will get on.
But yeah, no, it's like we're kind of, as we say, we feel like we're at the beginning of the journey, really, of what dev mode can do. But yeah, hopefully, already we've heard from customers who are using it that it's really helped them streamline their kind of, designer developer collaboration.
Dare I say that it might even be the thing that fosters a little bit more innovation as well. Even if it's just by saying, do you know what? If developers and designers spend a bit more time in the room with each other, talking through a process, more ideas end up spitting out at the end of it. More improvements happen during the process rather than through iteration afterwards and so on like that. I mean, would you say that that's fair? That's kind of one of the advantages of the multiplayer thing, isn't it?
Yeah. Absolutely, and also the fact that stakeholders from across the organisation can really easily get involved in the design process. I think, it will help kind of the ideation, and I think also by streamlining the process of actually implementing those designs. If you spend less time translating designs into code, you've got more time for innovation.
Absolutely, and I think that is probably enough for today. Dev mode, I think, is fantastic as I say, as a fanboy of Figma already. This might sound a bit gushing, but I would recommend everybody to give it a go. I think it does genuinely transform how people can work together and be more productive. And there's never been a better time to be more productive than now. So thank you very much for joining us today, Oscar and Tom. I hope, what are you going to be working on tomorrow? Go on, give us a secret.
Yeah, I mean, we have a lot of exciting features. Can't tell the specifics, but
well,
we also have a quality week, so yeah, it's lots of small polish getting done now before the final release. So.
All right, excellent. Well, good luck with it, and we look forward to the end of the month. Thanks once more.
Thanks a lot. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Cheers.